So we might get started. We're 5 minutes in. So why don't we actually get started? And some of the things that I wanted to talk to you about tonight is the relationship between pressure from saddles and saddle design and the effects on your horse's ability to do his job and do it comfortably and healthily. Hello to Leslie. She's saying hello. Hopefully she doesn't have any problems. What we're still trying to help people understand is it's often not the fact that the horse doesn't want to do something. It's actually more the case that you physically can't do something. So we talk a lot about the pressure problem, and probably this is a great thing. And now I know I can't see you, so I don't know if you're actually doing this or not, but I want you to understand how pressure on muscles affect horses' ability to do their job and move and swing their joints properly. And some of you have probably seen me do this demonstration before in seminars or at Equitana. But I'm going to get you to do something. And please, I can't see you, but promise me that you're actually going to do this with me. So you understand that we've got, a rigid object sitting on top of a horse's soft moving back muscles, and parked on top of that rigid object is your 50, 60, 70, 80 kilos. Now, that's a lot of pressure coming down onto a small surface area. So there's a certain amount of pounds per square inch we talk about. So that's the amount of pressure over any inch of the surface area of the panel. Now, that's assuming that we've got the saddle design suiting the horse's back perfectly and the weight distribution happening perfectly over the whole surface area of the panel, then we would get a certain amount of pounds per square inch. If that's working well, wonderful. Hopefully the muscle can do its job. And there's a certain rating of pressure that actually starts to cause tissue damage. And we talk a lot about riders who are a little bit too big for their horses, or there's a whole bunch of adults riding ponies nowadays, and often we don't have the surface area, we don't actually have the horse's back bearing length to fit the size of saddle that the rider needs onto the pony's back. So we've actually reduced the amount of surface area to spread that same 60 or sometimes 70 kilos. And we've reduced the surface area of the saddle because we need a smaller saddle for the pony's bearing length. Now we've got a higher pounds per square inch. And at a certain point, that pounds per square inch starts to cause tissue damage. So it can, start creating muscle atrophy or muscle wastage. The horse can't use itself. It can start causing problems with blood supply to the muscle. It can start creating, nerve damage. It can start creating pressure in different areas. So as soon as that starts to happen, the horse can't actually use its muscles correctly. So let's do a little exercise to give you an idea of the role of muscle to move joints. So, we've got our horse's body, and we know that he's got big, long back muscles, he's got shoulder muscles, and they are there to move his joints. So if we're talking about skeletal muscle, which is the primary muscles that we're sitting on, if we're talking about skeletal muscle moves a bone, moves a joint. So I'm going to get you to do a little exercise. I'm going to put my arm up here. In fact, I'll move back a tiny bit so you can see me. So if you haven't done this demonstration before, do this. This is a really good example for you. So I want you to think about your bicep here. Now, your bicep is responsible, it moves across your elbow joint. It's responsible for moving your forearm up and down, bending your elbow joint. Okay, that's pretty simple. That's a pretty simple concept. So it does its job perfectly well. We can flex I haven't been working out very much recently. You can see there's no big bicep here. We can make a fist and flex up, and you can feel that muscle change its shape. So I want you guys to do a little quick exercise for me. Pop your fingers on top of that bicep. Okay, have a little feel. You can relax it down, and you can feel when it's not contracting that it's pretty soft and pretty long. So put your fingers on it. Now I want you to make a fist, and then, do your best weightlifting impersonation. I used to say Arnie impersonation, but there's a whole age group that don't understand what I'm talking about now. So Put your fingers on and just feel that shape change. So as it relaxes, it gets long and skinny, and as it contracts, it gets short and fat. So you can already start to see that muscles change shape when they're contracting and relaxing. So when they're doing their job, it happens underneath your saddle as well. So squeezing at this time. So I want you to put some pressure on. So I want you to imagine that now you've got 60 kilos, 70 kilos, whatever weight you are, of pressure down on that bicep. So squeeze it. Now you got your thumb on the underneath and your forefingers on top. Don't stick your fingernails in, you'll damage your muscle, but give it a really good squeeze and just squeeze it for a second. Now, if you're anything like me already, I can start to feel my fingers tingling. You can start to feel that there's blood supply lacking into your fingers. So that limb is starting to become a bit of a problem here. So now with your fingers, don't give up. I want you to really feel what the horse feels. And actually I can feel my fingers throbbing now. So I want you to now make a fist again, like you did before, and try and bend your elbow joint in the same way. Do it a few times. It's good for you. Squeeze, really squeezing. Got lots of pressure on that muscle. I hope you're doing this because otherwise I'm going to feel like a complete and utter idiot doing this. Giving it a good squeeze. Okay, now you might start to notice something at this point. It's getting harder and harder for me to bend my elbow joint. The longer I've got that pressure on there, you can relax it now. Oh, my shoulder joint hurts as well. The longer I've got that pressure on there, the harder it is for me to bend my elbow and use my joint properly, my limb properly. So have a little think about what happens at this point. If that pressure continues like that for, say, 45 minutes to an hour, just like when you're riding your horse, if that pressure continues, what might actually happen? And you can answer in your own home, you can join in on this. You might find that with that pressure, we start to restrict blood flow to the area. So we're getting less oxygen to the area. So the muscle can't do its job properly. It gets fatigued. So it hasn't got the same amount of power or strength to move that limb. As it cuts off blood supply, we might start to get some muscle wastage. We get lactic acid buildup as well. So it starts to get painful. It starts to get bruised. But what happens if I tell you that no matter what, you have to keep on bending your elbow joint? You just have to. Like you need it to feed yourself. You can't not do it. So for the next 45 minutes to an hour, you have to keep doing this. And if you don't do it, I'm going to smack you across the back of the head with a crop. So you might be thinking to yourself, every time I stop doing this, she's going to bop me on the head of the crop. Okay, how else can I still do this? So you might start to recruit other muscles. You might start to throw a little bit more shoulder action into it to get your limb to do what you want it to do. You might start to do something else, like put your head down there. So you start to use a compensatory action to achieve the same job, same outcome. This is no different to our horses. So they're affected by pressure on muscles, restricting the muscle's ability to do its job properly and move its joint. But they get in trouble for not doing it. So for instance, if they can't bring their hind leg through properly, we call that lazy. Oh, he's dragging his hind legs again. He's not tracking up. All right, give him a good walloping with the whip, or, get the spur into him and really get up him. Come on. And he's going to try and find a different way, but he's not doing it correctly. He's not using his body in the way that he's built to use his body. So he starts to recruit different muscles. He starts to develop compensatory posture, compensatory biomechanics, or way of moving. And when he does that, he sets himself up for overbuilding of other muscles, joint injury, and compensatory injury going on, as well as behavioral issues. Because he's trying to do something that he can't physically do, and he's getting told off when he can't do it. That's going to create anxiety in the horse. It's going to create reactivity, behavioral issues, bucking, rearing, stopping, dropping rails over jumps, refusing to go over jumps. So we've got to try and understand it sometimes from a horse's perspective, that often the things that we are seeing as incorrect, a horse's incorrect response to the aids, the horse not doing his job properly, is not always caused by his lack of uh, workmanship, if you like, his lack of willingness to do it. Sometimes it's his lack of ability to physically do the job. So this is a big penny I want you to drop in. And I'm going to try and share my screen. Now, as I did say, I'm a bit of a tech idiot here. So I've got a PowerPoint that I'd like to show you. And let's see if I can do a school. Look, it says screen share there. Let's go to share screen, and we're going to go through a couple of slides so you can start to see some of the muscles that are affected by incorrect saddle fit. Now, before I actually do that, we'll just discuss a little bit further that each horse has its own unique back profile. So that means its own unique conformation. So when we're looking at saddle fit, we start first by actually looking at the horse's unique conformation. So, he might have a certain height with her. He might have a certain length with her. His back might be a certain level. So that means he could be level in his back profile where the saddle panels sit. He could have a downhill sloping back. He could have an uphill sloping back. He could have a bit more curve through his back. His width and length might be short, so his balance point of his back is forward. Could be irregular wither. It could be a long wither. He could have a short bearing length to fit a saddle in. He could be quite long in the back. He could be long in the loin. That's just the longitudinal profile of the horse's back. When we start to think about the lateral, so the side-to-side profile, that changes as well. We can have horses with really round, broad shoulders and no withers, which we tend to call hoop-shaped trees or hoop-shaped horses. We can have horses with big shoulders, but they still have a wither profile. They're going to have different gullet measurements and different tree measurements. We can have backs that are more A-frame in pitch. That means when you're looking at them from behind, they look more like a triangle rather than a round hoop. We can have horses with rib cages that are slab-sided and they just drop off to the side. So that's that longitudinal profile. Now, if you think about what a saddle's job is, it needs to spread your weight over the greatest surface areas possible from front to back and side to side. Now, it can only do that. It can only get that pressure distribution even front to back and side to side if the design of the saddle matches your horse's unique back profile. So that means the rigid structure, the tree that's inside the saddle, needs to match his conformational design. And then your panels act as shock absorbers, but also a little bit of balance change. So you could have two horses, for instance, that have pretty similar back profiles. They could have the same size wither. They could have, A-frame shape, for instance. They could be a medium wide gullet angle, but one might be a downhill horse and one might be a level horse or an uphill horse. Now, their tree could be exactly the same tree, but the panels would be different to enable the weight distribution to be the same. So, for instance, with a downhill horse, we're going to need panels that are a little bit deeper in the front. And with an uphill horse, we're going to need panels that are deeper in the back so that we can maintain the balance point of the seat right towards the base of the wither. So that's how we manage to get even weight distribution front to back and side to side. So understanding that point that each horse has its own unique back profile, and each saddle design, model, brand is unique in its design elements as well. And that's the only way we can get the pressure distribution right for your horse with your weight clunking around on top. Now, we haven't even gone into symmetry and horses asymmetry and muscle wastage and all of those kind of things yet. We're literally talking about how we're going to get the pressure even on a horse's back so he can use his muscles to move his joint to do the job that you want him to do. I hope this is making sense. You can wave at me occasionally. I'm feeling like I'm just talking to myself here, which is, hey, that's something that I can do sometimes, but it's feeling a little weird as well. So make sure you wave at me occasionally if this is making sense. Thanks, Paula. I'm glad you like it. All right, so I'm going to, thanks, Ellie. I'm going to try and share this screen, and we're going to bring up a few slides to look at some of the ways that saddle pressure is influencing the horse's ability to do his job. Thanks, guys. I love it that you're waving at me and putting little comments. So, all right, if I bugger up the share screen, we'll see what we can do. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Hang on. Oh no, here it is. I'm going to share this screen. And hopefully, how do I make that now? Hopefully you guys can all see this, and I'm just going to go to slides. Oh, how do I make it go to a slide now? Oh, there we go. Look at that. I got it. Can you all see that? Can a few people wave at me so I can see? Thanks, Claire. Thanks, guys. You can actually see this screen now. Beautiful. I love it. Look at me. I might even be able to use technologies. Someone was chatting to me earlier and she said, like, have you worked out how to do those emails yet? I'm like, the Saddlefitter. I don't know how to do all these email things. Okay, so I'm going to go to a few little slides back. Okay, so there's some of our muscles. Actually, we might just go a little forward. All right, so first little slide I'd like you to see, and hopefully you can see this quite well on your screen as well, is some of the issues that we get when horses have adverse pressure. So it causes areas of atrophy. And you can probably see, and I'm hoping, can you actually see that cursor that I've got going? Can everyone see that? Raise a hand for me if you can see my cursor going around. Thanks, guys. I can see you raising your hands. Okay, so you can see that we've got the trapezius muscle in the front here and the trapezius back branch of the trapezius muscle here. So that's definitely a muscle that we find, I would say, if we're coming out to horses with saddle issues, we would probably see, you know, at least 60% of horses having issues with the muscle wastage or pain or pressure in the front of the saddle. And there's a really good reason for it, because if you think about how a saddle fits, you've got your saddle sitting like this, you've got your tree point coming down across this trapezius area here. You've got your stirrup bar running over the top of the trapezius, and you also have your first girth strap coming down over the top. So it's an area of high pressure for a horse. And it's, of course, an area as well that people know about fitting a gullet angle to, but they don't necessarily understand that it's not just a gullet angle that changes fit, but it can also be tree width as well. So you could have the correct gullet angle. Say if we're talking about a horse like a hoop-shaped horse, you could have an extra wide gullet angle that's sitting like this, but the horse is a hoop shape, and you actually need the tree to be out here. This angle is still the same, but the actual whole head of the tree is wider. So we often come across people thinking they've done the right thing and gotten the right gullet angle in through here, but in fact, the whole head of the saddle is too narrow. So they've got pressure under the stirrup bars, etc., etc. Now, so this is an area that we see that horses commonly are getting muscle wastage. And it's also a really big issue because horses change their posture from this. So you probably saw, or some of you guys probably saw that little video I put up of Artie, my old retired dressage horse. And when I put a saddle on him, I was describing what happens when they've got too much pressure in the front. Horses tend to dip away from pressure. And I hope you can see me as well. I can see me, so I'm assuming you guys can see me as well as the actual screen. But when they get, thank you guys, when you dip away, when a horse dips away and drops down, he actually drops down through his torso here. So he drops down through his thoracic sling. And if you guys don't know what a thoracic sling is, it's a group of muscles, tendons, and ligaments that hold this whole big torso up between the two scapulars. So there's no bony connection between the horse's shoulder blades on either side of its huge rib cage and it's scapulars. It's the sling of muscles. So that means that it can actually drop down between it. So when we talk about a horse being on the forehand, for instance, that is actually a biomechanical reaction or a response. It's a postural change. So he's got his scapulars sitting here, and he's got this big torso, and it's dropping down between the two. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Hang on a second. Let's go back here. So it's dropping down. I've got a trigger happy touchpad here. This torso here is dropping down. So often when we see horses like that, they're contracted forward and drop down. We'll often see a few things. We'll see atrophy here. We will also see overdeveloped pectoral muscles as the horse pushes down in the front. We'll see overdeveloped brachiocephalicus muscle here as well. Often he's in this leg stance. Can you actually see this offside leg here is stepping back underneath itself? So instead of the horse being able to keep its balance by having its hoof directly underneath its shoulder, they often have their front legs on an angle backwards. They often drop down through their back here as well. So you see a postural change. They can't actually lift up through the torso because they're dropping away from pain. So that's a few things. And you can see these arrows. So this is dropping down here. Now, when the horse drops down through this thoracic sling and changes his posture and drops his back, his neck lifts up, which is completely the opposite to what we're attempting to do when we're riding them. We're trying to get them to come around and drop on the bit. So we'll come across people all the time going, oh my God, he's so difficult to get on the bit. So they strap on a bit more hardware on the front. They stick on some, draw reins and all of those kind of things in an attempt to get the horse to put his head and neck down and be able to be steering him. It's got less to do with what's happening in the front end and more to do what's happening underneath the saddle. Often we have, bitting issues and things like that as well. And horses have pathology that cause them to want to lift their head up and stay away and not be out around. But often if it's being caused by a saddle fitting issue, it's happening from the front here. So that's one of the areas of atrophy. This great big long back muscle here as well. So longissimus muscle, and we've also got, there's a muscle you can't see here, latissimus dorsi, that comes up through here. These muscles, we often see horses with a raised spine, and they have got muscle wastage on either side. They look like a tent. And you can have a horse who's an A-frame shape, like often thoroughbreds are an A-frame shape, but they do have well-developed back muscles. It's just that they're a little bit pitchy in shape. The horses that we're talking about are horses that you can see an obvious raised spine and then a little drop before they go to their rib shelf. Now, these horses have not been able to use their back muscles correctly, and often that can be from incorrect saddle pressure or balance. The panels might be too hard, the channel might be too narrow, and the horse is literally not lifting up and using its back correctly. Another area that we see massive problems in is under the back of the saddle. I hope I'm not depressing you guys too much at the moment. I'm trying to help you understand a little bit about the relationship between pressure and the horse's ability to use its muscles and its joints. But it can be a bit depressing. We all end up not wanting to ride our horses for a period of time after something like this. So in under the cantle here. Now, it can happen for quite a few reasons. It can happen because the balance of the saddle is tilting too far to the back. And suddenly we've got a high pressure towards the back end. Now, when we're talking about saddle fitting, when we're talking about pressure distribution, our aim is to get the rider's weight as close to the base of the wither as possible. So you understand that the horse's center of gravity is forward, but also its back balance point, in order to be able to carry you as an easy weight to carry, is towards the base of the wither. So when we're looking at seat balance, and this is a tip for you, you can go and have a look at your seat balance tomorrow. The flattest, most horizontal part of the seat should be looking pretty much over the base of the wither. You should be able to sit really towards the base of the wither so that your weight is going to be distributed in a way that he can carry you easily, and he's not getting more pressure in the front or more pressure in the rear of the saddle. This is the kind of strongest area for him to be able to carry you. When he's having to carry your weight towards the rear, this is a slightly weaker area. Now, horses can be short through the loin here and actually have quite strong lower backs, and those horses do all right. But when a horse conformationally is a little bit longer here and we put the rider's weight towards the rear and have too much pressure towards the rear, suddenly the horse struggles and it can't use its lower back, its lumbar region and its lumbar sacral joint and its sacroiliac joint. It can't use that correctly. So you often see horses end up with a forward pelvis tilt. So they've, again, dropped away from pressure. So they've tilted their pelvis forward. Their hind legs now are hanging out behind them. So if you have a look at this slide, you can imagine this tilting down here. The pelvis is tilting forward. The hind legs are out further behind them. And they lose the strength. This loin area is like a bridge. So we've got power being created in the hindquarter, which helps propel the horse forward or push the horse forward, or that's from an impulsion perspective, or the hind legs can also sit in collection so they can carry weight or they can thrust forward. But the loin is the bridge between all that energy that's generated behind and the rest of the horse's body to actually enable it to go forward and use its back and limbs correctly. So when we have too much pressure in this back area here and the pelvis tilts forward, the hind legs lose power. The hind legs can't push as hard. The hind legs can't come underneath themselves correctly. They can't sit and weight bear as well. So that has a whole huge flow-on effect on transitions, upward and downward transitions, the horse's ability to track up as well. So you understand tracking up is the hind limbs or the hind feet either stepping into the prints of the front feet or over tracking in walk, for instance, and stepping over. Because of the forward pelvis tilt and that lack of bridge in the loin, those hind legs now are hanging out in the next state, basically, and they can't do the job. But then we're telling them off and telling them that being lazy. The other thing that we find is in jumping horses, that's often where they'll be dropping rails behind if they're having to carry too much weight. And just on this slide as well, there's a bit of a flow-on effect. You can see that biceps there. Often when horses are struggling with weight bearing and they've got a forward pelvis tilt, we can often see atrophy happening in the biceps as well. And that can be a bit of a dead giveaway, especially if they've got pain in the sacroiliac joint. So let's move along a little slide. And I want to show you what happens when those muscles get atrophied, where the hypertrophy or the overbuilding muscles occur. So this is so you can start to take a really good look at your horse and go, oh, is he actually overbuilding in these areas and underbuilding in other areas? When we go and do a saddle fit, I'm going to stand back and not even touch the horse and have a little look at what his musculature is like and what his posture is like, and we'll have a really good idea already of exactly how that horse is moving and using his body, and probably how he's carrying his rider. And it's not people all go, oh my God, how did you know that? Well, because he's got a certain muscle shape. I'm sure people from the AIS can look at an Olympic athlete, a runner, and look at their musculature and do exactly the same thing. They can predict how that horse is going, or horse, that runner, for instance, or a swimmer is about to be able to move based on their musculature, because muscles move joints, propel us forward and allow us to do our job. Okay, so areas of overbuilding as a result. As I said to you before, when a horse has atrophy in the trapezius muscle and it lifts its head and neck up and drops away through the thoracic sling, you get overbuilding of brachiocephalic. So that's that big underneck that we often see in horses. When you start to see a really big underneck and you haven't got a really well developed trapezius and rhomboids in the front here, the horse is not able to use his neck correctly. That's a red flag. He's either not being ridden in a round profile. And sometimes we don't. We have endurance horses that are in a much more open frame, and certainly show jumpers and eventers can be like that. But when we see massive overbuilding here, it's an indication to us that the horse is also not using its trapezius properly underneath as well. Then big pectoral muscles, big serratus muscle as well. So when a horse is tilting forward like this, he suddenly cannot come around and lift up through the thoracic sling. When he does this, he can't push from behind anymore. He has to start to pull a little bit more with his front legs. And when he's pulling with his front legs, because he can't use the back end, he starts to overdevelop through serratus. They often look like big love handles on horses. And then you get big, pecs out the front here. Off the track thoroughbreds, you see it, probably 70% of the time we'll see these big overbuilt pecs, overbuilt brachiocephalic, big overbuilt serratus muscle here, and atrophied with the pockets or the trapezius muscle. The other thing that happens is this spinalis dorsi muscle here often looks like it's bigger. Now, I'm actually not sure, and we've talked to physios about this, whether the spinalis itself is actually getting overdeveloped, or it's the fact that the trapezius muscle around it is underdeveloped and atrophied. But this muscle is kind of like a round muscle. If you've ever seen an off-the-track thoroughbred or, a horse with a bit of atrophy, like a show jumper, where they haven't been using their wither pockets properly and they look like they've got this kind of big round fat muscle at the base of the wither, it gets wider, that's the spinalis dorsi. Now, that muscle is a problem because that sits in the channel of the saddle. If you've got your panels sitting on either side of the wither here, and you've got this big overdeveloped spinalis muscle, it narrows the space in the channel, and then they're getting pressure on the side. As soon as they start to get pressure on the sides of the withers, they sure as hell are not going to lift their back up. So then the problem continues. Because they're getting pressure from the channel, they can't round and lift through their back. They can't develop the trapezius muscle, and the process just keeps happening. So then finally, the overbuilding back here as well. So overbuilding through the loin. And this is a good question as to what this actually is. I have actually asked again some physios and vets about this when we see this bulge behind the saddle, whether it's as a consequence of the muscle bulging up because there's a forward pelvic tilt. Remember, they've got atrophy just under the cantle here and then massive overbuilding here. So is it the fact that the pelvis is tilting forward and we're seeing this muscle bunch up, or is it the gluteal tongue coming through here, or is it the psoas muscle right underneath that is overbuilding? But again, it's a dead giveaway. When we see this big overbuilding here, we know that the horse is not using its lower back muscles correctly. So that's some of the areas that we can actually see, and it affects the horse's ability to move correctly and to move the way nature built him to move. And whenever that starts to happen, we have horses who develop compensatory injuries. So whether they develop kissing spine, whether they develop pain in the SI joint, whether they develop because they're loading, for instance, their front legs more, whether they start to put more strains on tendons and ligaments in the front legs. There's a whole bunch of things. Again, if they've got pain in the lower back and they've got sacroiliac problems as a result, often, oops, didn't mean to do that again. So I told you I've got this trigger happy little thing here. Often when they've got pain here, because they're holding their back, they're overusing their hock joint, and then they start to damage their hock joint. So think back to this example I gave you of being able to use your bicep to move your joint. If you can't use it correctly and you start to overcompensate with another group of muscles or another joint, you start to put wear and tear on that joint and lead to compensatory issues. All right, is everyone doing all right? You keeping up? You can wave at me while I just take a quick sip of my hot chocolate. Thanks, that'll keep me going too. I was joking today that after all the lockdowns that we're having at the moment, I need to stick some vodka in my hot chocolate and no one will know. Okay, let me go through to a few little things. So this one here, here's a goodie. Look at that poor horse down there. That makes me want to cry. That horse doesn't want to behave like that, by the way. He's got no choice to behave like that. But you can see that big brachiocephalic muscle. He's going to have so much, vertebral issues in there. Pressure up the top here, you can see some of the effects of high amounts of pressure. Now, this is on the back of the horse's scapula. This horse is more of a hoop-shaped horse up the top here. And even though the gullet angle in that saddle was right, the actual tree was not wide enough. So the head was not wide enough. And people often ask about, what's a hoop-shaped head? It's a more open head. It's a broader head. Now, if you're a tiny itty bitty woman with a tiny itty bitty pelvis and you're riding on a big hoop-shaped horse, often what riders will do, they'll go, oh my God, this saddle's too wide for me. So they'll go and buy themselves a saddle that has a narrow twist. They might have the gullet angle correct, but they've got a saddle with a narrow twist and it's more of an A-frame shaped tree. It can't fit on these horses. You might have the angle of the gullet correct, but the actual head is too narrow. So suddenly we create all this pressure and we start to get tissue damage as a result. And that little horse down the bottom, he's a really good example of not being able to come round, not being comfortable to lower his neck. And grumpy horses down the bottom. Okay, so I want to show you a couple more things. Okay, this horse down the bottom here is a perfect example of compensatory posture. So as we were talking about before, we need horses to be able to lift up through their back. And just think about this for a second, because I probably haven't made this really clear enough. In order for a horse to use his limbs effectively when he's carrying a weight, he needs to engage his core muscles. So when I did that little belly lift on Artie on the video that I did, it's kind of like a nothing video, but it's perfect for showing what happens when I give him a little belly lift and he engages his core and lifts his back up into a back lift. His head and neck drop down. It's the sheer mechanics of how his body is meant to work. So when we see the opposite happening here, this horse is disengaged through its back. It's dropping down. Often people will ask me why their horse looks like it's got a big gut. Oh, it's got a grass belly. It actually doesn't. It's got really poor posture. So we need to do work with these horses to try and help it regain its posture and its core. There was actually a really good study done a couple of years ago, and if I've got any physios on here and biomechanics specialists, I don't know if we've got Dr. Raquel Butler on here, but it was a wonderful study that was done with carrot stretches, all those dynamic and static stretches that we do with horses, getting them to lift their back and bring their head and neck underneath. And they did a study where they had a group of horses that just did their normal work. And then they took another group of horses, and for 3 months, I think it was, they did nothing but belly lifts and carrot stretches. And they were measuring the density of the multifidus muscle. So that's the horse's deep core muscle that runs underneath that big longissimus muscle. And they were measuring, ultrasounding the density of that multifidus muscle. And the group that did all of those stretches increased the density of the multifidus muscle. I'm pretty sure it was about 30%, but I might be wrong on those figures. But it increased the density. So they weren't ridden horses. All they did was in handwork, groundwork, stretching. That was it. And they increased the strength of their back. So that's their carrying ability with a rider. So when we come across horses like this that are in really poor posture, just riding them, just fixing their saddle is probably not going to give them the back health that we need them to have. We need to do some other things to help rehab their back so they're strong enough to carry a weight. Because if you think about it, horses were not meant to carry riders. They've got this lovely flat spot in the middle here, and they go faster than us. So at some stage in our, history and our evolution as human beings, we went, oh, we should try and sit on that because they go faster than us and they're stronger than us. But they're not built by nature. They're not structurally designed to carry that weight here. So when we do it, we change their ability to use their body. So as conscious humans, as conscious riders and horse owners, we have to be thinking to ourselves, how can we make this horse an athlete? How can we make him as strong as he can possibly be to carry our weight, which is not meant to be there in the first place? So whenever you see something like this, think about how you're going to rehab it. But you can see dropped gut, dropped back, forward tilting pelvis with this overbuilt area here across the loin, hind legs angled out behind it, front legs angled backwards as well, and overbuilding a brachiocephalicus here. So that's typical compensatory posture from a horse who hasn't been able to use its back correctly underneath the weight of a rider. This was a saddle fitting that I did, and its saddle definitely was not fitting and creating, you know, a situation where the horse was not comfortable to lift up through its back and use itself correctly. Okay, let's have a look and see what the time is. Oh my gosh, look, we've been going 45 minutes already. I think what would be really good right now, I was going to talk a little bit about asymmetry and things that you can do to help your horses with that. But I think we might open it up to a few questions. I'm going to just have a little look. Let me see if I can get some asymmetry here for you. Okay, that's some nasty compensatory posture problems, increased problems. So this horse obviously is in extreme compensatory posture. This horse has extreme muscle wastage as well. You can see that raised spine and the muscle wastage in its wither pockets. So some of the results that we get from that compensatory posture, we've got soreness in the lower back, lower neck, hamstrings, locking through this last of the thoracic vertebra. They often just start to lock into place and they can't move and lift it and, you know, do a belly lift very well. Onset of kissing spine, compensatory sacroiliac joint pain, hock pain, traveling on the forehand, and obviously muscle wastage as well. I just want to get you some photos of asymmetry. Oh, hard to fit horse. Hang on a second. You know what, we might just go to this for 2 seconds because this is a really good little slide for you when we were talking about your horse's unique back profile. So this is top line balance. So if we look at all of these different photos here, you can actually see what I mean about the different back balances. So this horse is a croup high and he's downhill in his balance. I joke when I do this seminar about this is a don't call me, I'll call you kind of saddle fitting. If you've got a horse like this with a low wither and he's croup high and he's sliding downhill, please don't call me because they're really difficult to fit. It's very hard to go against the laws of physics and not end up sitting in the horse's ears. We've got a horse who is actually croup level, but you can see that his back slopes downhill. Now that's a typical off the track thoroughbred style back for us. Then we've got a horse whose back is level. We've got a horse who is slightly uphill in his back profile where his saddle panels are sitting. And then we've got a horse who is really uphill. Now, all of those horses, their saddle balance is going to be different. If we put exactly the same saddle, let's imagine they were all the same gullet angle and, you know, their backs were all relatively flat so they could take the same tree profile longitudinally. If we put them on, we're going to have that first horse with the balance down into its wither pockets, the next horse still a little bit down, the next horse might be sitting level, the next horse, the seat balance is starting to get towards the rear, and the next horse is, you know, hanging off its tail. That's going to change the pressure distribution along that saddle. So when we're thinking about how we either design or fit a saddle to a horse, top line balance is one of the first things that we look at. And I'm going to send you guys an email after this. I've got a kind of cool surprise for you, but I'm going to send you an email probably later on tonight that is going to give you some links to some documents you can download, and you can actually go and tick off what you think your horse is. If you need a little bit of help assessing what your horse's unique back profile is, I'm really happy to send you out some checklists that will help you take a look at that. So remind me to do that at the end. So that's his top line balance. And now we're looking at top line shape. So this guy over here on the left is pretty flat, flat as a pancake. This horse has got a little bit more shape to its back because it's wither starts to go up. This guy has a slightly more downward slope first before it heads up, so it's got a little bit more curve through its back. That guy, or mare actually, has got compensatory posture, so we've got quite a dip. And this is an old horse with quite a curve. So that's the actual shape of the tree. When we're talking about making trees or tree choices, our tree has got to match the arc of the horse. Now, if we've got a horse in compensatory posture, we are not going to build a saddle or match a tree to the compensatory posture. We want that horse to be able to come out of that posture. So sometimes we'll actually not be able to fit that horse until you've done work with it. Sometimes we can use shimming systems. So we can take a really good guess as to where the horse is going to go and actually shim that horse and keep changing the shimming system as that horse starts to develop, and also changing the flocking in the saddle so that as the horse improves, we can keep giving it room and room to change into good posture. So the actual arc of the tree is really incredibly important for us to get the shape right, and then the levelness of the horse's back. We build the panel pitch and the panel depth to help get the balance right through the panels for the back level. Okay, let's just go through. I'm just going to look for, that's A-frame backs. Now all the problems with A-frame backs. Hang on a second. High withers, short backs. All my problem. This is my, please don't call me one, because you're probably going to be riding on its wither. Okay, broad backs, forward girth grooves, native breeds. I love this photo down here. That's a square. That's not a horse's back, that's a square. It's very difficult to fit a horse like that. Kind of need to build a tree that comes out like that. That was a really cool horse. That horse's name is Wombat, and we custom made it a hoop-shaped tree. Okay. Why does my saddle slip sideways? So we're going to quickly touch on asymmetry. Asymmetry is something that, thank God, more and more people are starting to become aware of as a problem with saddle fit, and also for riders, not just for the horses, but for riders as well. Because as you can see from that top image up here, that rider is going to have a hell of a lot of back and hip pain. They're probably going to get pain in one of their knees and ankles as well. You know, they're probably going to get pain in their own trapezius muscle and, you know, end up with a bit of a neck tilt. So when they're dropping off to one side because of horse asymmetry, they're also starting to damage their own body and get compensatory pain as a rider. So why does asymmetry occur in a horse? So there's two primary areas that we find asymmetry in the horse. Well, three really, but we'll start from here. We have asymmetric shoulders and we have asymmetric hindquarters. Now, normally the asymmetric shoulders up here are either created from hoof imbalance, and that's a high percentage of the time. So a horse might have a high heel, low heel syndrome. It might have a true clubby foot. It might have had an injury in the foot. It might have poor farrowing, and that can be addressed with a farrier and often x-rays and things like that. It might have had an injury, and all of these things can change the scapular location relative to the spine and the rib cage. So if you remember what I was talking about before, here's your horse's scapulars, and your scapulars have to move backwards and forwards underneath the front of your saddle. And in between is that dirty, great torso that you're sitting on, its ribs with all of those big, heavy organs in it. But there's no bony connection like our collarbones holding the scapula to the rib cage. So when angles change in the horse's hooves, it's getting late, I need some, shouldn't have put that vodka in that hot chocolate. You can have scapulars being one higher than the other. You can have a ledging one going sideways. You can also have a rearward scapula, so one that is more rearward and one is more forward. Now, you're thinking, so what? The so what is a problem with scapulars because they've got to rotate under the front of the saddle. So if you see this horse up here, this is a big bulgy one. So if I measure the distance between the wither of the spine and that shoulder blade, that distance is far greater than that distance. And we've got a saddle tree sitting across here, somehow that shoulder has got to make it underneath the front of the saddle with the same amount of space and room as this one. Well, it can't do that. So if you've got a big shoulder and a flat shoulder, that big shoulder, when it rotates, has this much push on the saddle, but this one only has a little return. So it's big push, little return, big push, little return, big push, little return, every single stride. So several things happen at that point. That poor old saddle, that poor old shoulder here gets a lot of pressure. The wither gets pressure. The spine, because the saddle's going to want to move across the horse, the spine, especially at the cantle and the paraspinal ligament, gets pressure. And then often, as the saddle tilts and twists, it goes into the other side of the wither on this side as well. So we get massive issues with asymmetry, with the saddle not being able to sit straight. It's a problem that has to be corrected because the horse has to develop compensatory ways of going to deal with the pressure he's getting more on one side of his back than the other. And if you think about this for a second, with this big shoulder, with the saddle pushing diagonally, and you've got your big longissimus muscle here and you've got your trapezius muscle here, what do we know about horses? They want to move away from pressure. So suddenly this horse starts to curve through here. Where do you reckon his neck goes? His neck curves to the left as well. So because of the pressure of the saddle, this horse is going to want to bend left. He's probably going to want to step this left hind leg away from the pressure and step underneath himself all the time. But the biggest issue is he's going to curve to the left. Now, when you start to try and bend that horse right, we get this scream from riders all the time. He doesn't want to bend right. Oh, he's so resistant to the right rein, or he'll only pick up right canter and not left canter. Again, dead giveaway. There's a reason why he can't bend right. And if he's got asymmetric shoulders, we have to do something about it. We have to either use a correction shim system in a pad or do something with his saddle. It depends on whether this is caused by long-term injury and we can't fix it, to allow the same amount of space under the front of this saddle for this shoulder as we do for this one. So we've got to be able to allow that shoulder to rotate underneath the front of the saddle and not push the tree sideways. So this is a very important thing to take home. And then the problem with asymmetric hindquarters is the saddle will nearly always drop to the lower hip side, because not only is he asymmetric in his hips, but usually in the rib cage as well. So it will push the saddle over and we'll see a saddle slide. That's actually a slightly more difficult problem to fix, depending on the way the horse's biomechanics are going. Shimming doesn't just fix the problem. So often people try and shim there. It won't just fix the problem if we've got a real hip thrust happening when the horse moves. So addressing the underlying causes, first of all, of why the asymmetry is there, and then addressing how do we rehab the horse so we can make him more symmetrical. It often involves what we call a circle of care. So we might have our farriers, our vets, our physiotherapists and body workers, our trainers and our saddle fitters and our riders. And it's a holistic approach to helping this horse be able to rehab and use his body evenly so he can carry you with as much comfort and health and improve his performance as we possibly can. And it is possible. I saw a horse not long ago who is actually 22 years old, and he had poor saddle fit when I saw him, and all sorts of funky issues. And he's an old dressage schoolmaster, and we fitted him and we've been doing shim systems, and he's asymmetric. So we put a balance strap on one side to help hold the saddle in the center of the horse's body. And on seeing him again, he's muscled up. He's more symmetrical. And if anything, he's throwing the rider to the other side now. So he's been able to slowly get his body back to being slightly more symmetrical, even at the age of 22. So it is possible to come back from these postural asymmetries and muscular asymmetries and biomechanical asymmetries if we really work with the circle of care, all of the practitioners that go into making a horse healthy. Okay, I think I'm nearly talked out. So how about, let me stop screen sharing for a second. Oh, how do I do this? Stop share. There we go. I nearly stopped the recording. Hey, I'm back. Oh, there's been heaps of questions coming up. Sorry, I couldn't see those questions while I was screen sharing very well because, again, I'm a bit of an idiot like that. Let me just scroll up and see some of these questions. Okay. Speaking of hoop trees, are there wide treed saddles that are narrow in the twist, or does that not exist? Okay, that's a tricky question, and I'll address it really quickly. This is Patrina. Um, yes, that is possible, but it depends on how the saddle is made. So there's essentially two different types of saddles. There is synthetic saddles that have a synthetic tree to them, and they have a molded seat rubber that goes on top. So, for instance, Aeroplus is a brand that we carry, which is not a true hoop, but it's very close. It's an open-headed saddle. So remember, we were talking about the actual head being quite wide. And what they've done is the seat rubber that they've built that goes on top of it, they can, because it's an injection molded seat rubber, they can make the seat rubber more pitchy to enable the twist to be narrower. So yes, it is possible. And I'm a rider like that. I have a very, very narrow pelvis. A lot of people know my story that I busted my pelvis trying to pop a baby out and it didn't work because my pelvis is too narrow. And, you know, I trained to Grand Prix as a dressage rider. And one of the things before I knew about this, before I knew about how saddles should fit riders, I would have so much pain. I would get off the horse and literally have to haul myself up via the stirrup leather to stand up because I was killing my sciatic nerves, you know, damaging my lumbar area, straining muscles. And I was sitting in a saddle that was too wide in the twist for me and didn't know about it. But of course, I was riding big warm bloods as well. So they needed big, broad saddles. So yes, it does exist. In English treed saddles, so in the traditional wooden hoop tree, you have, you know, a tree. I should have put some trees in here. I could have showed you. You have your tree. I'll start from the front here. You have the head of your tree and you go into the rails and you go up into the seat. Now, the wooden framework is there and then the seat has got webbing that creates the shape of the seat. And it has both longitudinal webbing and lateral webbing across the seat. And then a piece of foam that is actually rasped. It's a soft foam. So the webbing is what gives you the kind of shock absorbency for the rider. And then the seat just gives you a little bit of extra comfort and squidginess. So the problem with a wooden tree, a wooden hoop tree, is how do we go from that broad base of a wooden hoop tree and web it in a way that we can create more of a triangle shape for the rider? It can be a little bit challenging. There are ways, and we work with our manufacturers, and there's other manufacturers out there who can find different ways of webbing and different ways of rasping the seat foam to try and make a more narrow twist. And also the way that the skirting is sewn into the seat, that can also help make the twist more narrow for the rider as well. So hopefully that made a little bit of sense for you, Patrina. Okay, Emma Green, when you have a horse that you're rehabbing has poor posture, how do you fit the saddle to allow them to lift the back, but also provide support? So in a horse with extreme muscle wastage, allowing the horse to have room to lift up the back without the saddle flattening and causing issues elsewhere. Yes, I do understand. It really comes down to using half pads with correction shims. So Emma, often what we do is try, if we've got a horse with extreme muscle wastage, we don't want to fit to that wastage. We want to try and fit the horse a little bit wider and then use a shimming system that allows us to not restrict movement, for instance, of the scapula. So it provides support to the saddle. If anything, I kind of think about shims like false muscle. So where the horse's muscle should be to support the framework of the saddle, allowing it to develop and continually changing the shim. So any horse that we are rehabbing and we're using correction shims, we need to be rechecking that regularly. And there's something that you guys can be doing if you've got horses, like you've got yourself an off the track thoroughbred, taking good photos from the day you get it and take them weekly. So take side profiles of the horse's back so you can see what his posture is looking like from the side, and then go to the rear, make sure the horse is standing square on flat surface and his head's pointing forward. Go to the rear and put your camera up on his croup and shoot towards his shoulders. So you can see the angle of the horse's shoulders, you can see the muscle development, and make sure that you are taking those photos every week if you've got a rehab horse, because we see our horses all the time and we don't notice the changes so much. But when you actually take a series of photos, that it's like definite, you'll actually start to go, oh my God, he's really changed shape. The other thing that you can do is templating your horse yourself. And we can show you how to actually do templates on the horse. But excellent piece of equipment that anyone can go out and buy. Officeworks have them, is those, I call them bendy sticks. Okay, we've got Saddlefitter sticks that are leather coated ones, but you can actually get a blue ruler. It's a Draftsman ruler, or it's called a flexi curve, and you can buy them from Officeworks, office supply shops. You can buy it online, and it's a bendable blue ruler. And we just mark the center with a Nico pen, and you can bend that over your horse's back. So I like to take shoulders, and I like to take wither pockets, and I like to take top line profile of a horse that is changing shape and rehabbing. And you just trace it onto a piece of paper, write the date on it, and then do it once a month. Do it once every 2 weeks. You'll be able to compare those templates and see how much is changing, and then you'll know how frequently you need to be getting out a saddle fitter to do changes, or whether you should be changing your correction shims yourself. That makes sense, hopefully, Emma. And you've put in here, how frequently should a saddle fit be scheduled? For us, if we've got a growing horse or a rehab horse, I'd like to see that horse every 3 months. Even, like we work with top level riders, Grand Prix riders, and when we've got a horse who's working up to a next level, we actually see it relatively quickly. They change musculature so frequently. Or if a horse is going from, maybe he's had a spell or he's had an injury and he's coming back into work, we want to see the horse at the beginning, and we want to see the horse when he's 3 months into work, because chances are he's going to need a change of flocking, or he may have gone out of gullet size already. Also, like if we are saddle fitting a horse that's had poor saddle fit, and we've got a new saddle on that horse, and suddenly he can use his body, it's amazing. We might go back for our 6-week check or our 20 to 30 hour ride check, and that horse has gone out of gullet size. It's like a hallelujah moment for us, because we know that we're doing the right thing and he's developing and growing. Sometimes it's frustrating for the client because, God, the saddle's got to go and be changed, or we've got to do something, or it's an extra cost. But I think that's a wonderful thing. I think, oh my God, we've done such a good job with this horse that he's changed so much and developed so much. Brilliant. We're doing the right things. So hopefully, 3 months if it's a rehab horse. If it's a young horse growing, 3 to 6 months. If it's a mature horse and, he's reached his full height, he's 7, he's reached his full height and he's, pretty stable in his work, every 12 months. 12 months at the outside though, don't go, because, your flocking can compress. And if you're an asymmetric rider, you might squish down your flocking on one side, and before you know it, your saddle's starting to go skew-if and go asymmetric. So let me have a little look and see if there's any more questions in here. So if anyone's got any more questions, you can pop them up in the chat quickly. I'm going to tell you something really exciting. There's a few people who have been waiting desperately for me to pull my finger out and fix the saddle fitting course that we did. I had real problems with the platform that we were on, and I kept getting bugs in the last few videos. So we have finished the migration onto a brand new platform, onto Kajabi. In fact, we're using the Horse Pro Hub platform for the saddle fitting course, and it's a six-week course. You can work through it at your own pace. You can do whatever you like. It's got videos and PDFs, and it's got downloadable checklists, and it's designed for both horse owners and also other industry professionals who want to add, some saddle fitting knowledge. And it's there to help you work out what your own horse's back profile is, work out what your own personal rider saddle needs are. So what you need as a rider, work out if you're looking for secondhand saddles or you've got a rehab horse, how to actually look at when you need to make changes. So it's not just for someone who wants to do a saddle fitting course, because in fact it's not actually a certification to become a saddle fitter. It's to give as many tools and skills to our horse owners as we possibly can to help them recognize when things are going wrong, help them save some money when their saddle's starting to be incorrect and they've broken their horse because of it. So knowing when things are wrong, knowing when to change things, and just helping people develop skills. If you're a rider with multiple horses and you're trying to use one horse on multiple saddles, wrong way, one saddle on multiple horses. You can tell I'm getting tired. My brain's falling out my ears now. How to actually do that, how to take templates, how to take the right measurements, all of those kind of things, and how to assess movement. So we're actually launching it tomorrow. We're really excited about it. Let me have a quick look. How do you fit a saddle to a horse with a high wither? Not much top line muscle and only in light work. Okay, so Natalie, this is to you, Natalie James. This is a definite issue. First of all, you've got to make sure that the tree is correct. A high withered horse, it may be there's two elements here. It may actually conformationally have a high wither, or it might look like it's got a high wither because it's got muscle atrophy, so in the wither pockets. There can be several problems that occur from that. First of all, obviously clearance over the top of the wither, but actually also clearance of the sides of the wither. So when we have a wither that's doing this and the saddle is locking down on either side, not only do we have problems with clearance at the top, but the panels are jamming onto the sides of the wither as well. So the horse actually can't develop, even if it's doing correct work. I know you say this one's in light work. It can't actually develop, and it's going to stay atrophied and in poor posture because of the pressure problem. So again, Natalie, that's a correction shin pad system for me. I would most definitely be looking into how we can get a little bit more clearance, because again, if it's got some muscle wastage, if it's got muscle wastage behind its shoulders and you're not fitting that saddle up where it should be, the shoulders are not going to have room to rotate underneath the front of the tree points. So it's going to get a lot of pain trying to rotate its scapulars. The other issue that we have is if it's got a raised spine down its back and then its muscles are dropping away, the saddle sits down, but the spine's sitting a little bit higher into the channel. Now, when we go sideways on a horse, so when we do circles and turns, even if you're just hacking out in the bush somewhere, as the horse turns, that saddle's got to move slightly sideways over to one side, away from the direction of turn. If you don't have any muscle and your spine sitting up, when that saddle turns and you've got the rider's weight pushing the panel down into the horse's back, it's actually going to try and push into the edges of the spine, into the side of the spine where the paraspinal ligament runs. So it causes the horse a lot of pain as well and stops him being able to use his body. So anytime we've got a horse who's really light on in muscle, we want to have a correction shim that has the channel free. This is very important. Please don't go and buy yourself sheepskin half pad, even if it's a correction pad, with the channel full of sheepskin, because you're just mimicking the same pressure shape. You've got to be able to fill in where the muscle should be, leave the channel free so that when that saddle does move sideways, it's not shoving into the edges of the spine. It's clearing that. So hopefully that answered your question. Petrina, are you riding a horse for someone else that's dippy through the back? I'm not sure how much is confirmation and how much is compensatory, but I'm having trouble getting saddles to sit balanced on us. So you feel out of balance in the saddle at the moment. Is there anything I can do myself to help the situation? I guess checking to see whether the horse can do a belly lift. Like go and have a look. If you think about the compensatory posture, a photo that I showed you before with the front legs back a little bit, the overdevelop underneath the neck, the hind legs back a bit, the back dipping down, the belly dropping down. Stand the horse up and have a look. Do you think that the posture is poor? It's not just the dippy back that you're seeing. Are you seeing all of the other signs like the drop gut, the hind legs sticking out, the front legs back, all of those kind of things? If you're seeing that, it's compensatory posture. Doing some groundwork with it. Do some carrot stretches. Learn how to give it a belly lift. Walk it over poles in hand, anything that you can do. And then you've got to talk the owner into getting the saddle checked as well, because if the saddle is causing the compensatory posture, you've got to get that sorted. The horse is not going to be able to come out of compensatory posture if it's in pain and discomfort from the saddle. Be all and end all on that one, I'm afraid. So have a little look though, stand it up, see what the posture is looking like. If it's in that compensatory shape, check it. You can try doing a belly lift. Often, if a horse is in extreme, severe, long-term compensatory posture, when you go to give it a belly lift, it cannot lift up. If it's a recent thing, when you give it a belly lift, it will actually try. Be careful if you've got a horse in compensatory posture and you go and give it a belly lift and you haven't done one before and it's in pain, it might kick you or bite your butt. So please, please practice safety when you are running your hand underneath, the horse's belly to give it a little belly tickle up and see whether it can actually come around its back. Okay, Taylor's got a question regarding fender saddles. As you only have it's hard. As it only has an option of semi-quarter horse or full quarter horse bars and no flocking, makes it hard to find a perfectly fitting saddle for your horse. So how do you go about fitting these? These do sometimes make me cry, Taylor, to be really honest with you. I currently have a semi-quarter horse bar saddle. I can currently have a semi-quarter horse bar saddle as that's best suited his gullet measurement, but he's lifting at the back and wasn't sure how to optimize shin pads to optimize the fix. That's a tricky one. I'm not 100% sure I can answer that one over the on a webinar, because there's multiple elements that cause the saddle to move. It may not just be the gullet angle. And if I can drive one thing home to you guys tonight, please don't get sucked into thinking that the only thing that you change to correct a fit is the gullet angle, because it could be the shape of the tree. You could have a flat-backed horse with a slightly curvier tree on, and when it trots, this back end's bouncing in the breeze. It might have the right gullet angle at the front, but the back end's bouncing in the breeze. Or the head of the tree, and the balance point of the seat might be forward, and that might be causing it to lift behind. You could certainly try using shims at the front to get the back end down, but if the other elements are not correct, Taylor, you might be stuffing this up. Honestly, fender saddles can be a little bit challenging to correct, and investing in a really good pad that gives you correction options. If you know that the actual, whether it's a semi-quarter horse, if semi-quarter horse bars are actually the correct fit for you and you have actually, got it built correctly for your horse, and then it's just a balance issue, which is creating the bounce behind, shimming will work for you. But if there's other elements going on, that may be a problem. You might have to look a little bit more. How do you measure the best size saddle for the rider? Oh, hi Lisa. This is a fun one. This is a controversial issue. This one depends on the rider, but very first thing, so oh my god, I don't even know where to start with this one. You can see me cringing into my cup of hot chocolate at the moment, which is now a cup of cold chocolate. So measuring the seat for the rider depends a little bit on the rider's ability, but the old measurement of having 4 fingers behind your seat, behind your butt to the back of the cantle, is actually a really good way. So, sitting in the saddle and, measuring, do you have 4 fingers behind you? That's a really good way. Now, we have problems. Every rider's pelvis conformation is different as well. So we did a really cool experiment over in Italy with our Aeroplus manufacturers, because they have different twist widths and seat sizes, whether they're open or closed. And 4 of us as fitters were sitting in these, and I like a narrow twist, so I'd get in and go, oh my God, that's wonderful. And then one of my other fitters would get in and go, oh my God, it feels like a broomstick. I'm sitting on a broomstick. Her seat bones were in a different place. But what we discovered, we got off, we all sat on the same saddle and measured where our seat bones were, and where our tailbone or our pubic bone was sitting. And we were all very different. Some of us had narrow little seat bones, and the distance between our seat bones and our pubic bones was very short. Some of us had wider, some of us had longer. So all of us, as our pelvic conformation was quite different. And of course, then that's just the skeletal structure. Then we also have, flesh. Some of us have more flesh than others. So we all have different conformation. On top of that, we all have different flexibility through our hip flexors. So for instance, you might have a rider who's very tight in the hip flexors and they need to keep a shorter stirrup and they need to sit back a little bit in a saddle. They might need to go half size up in a saddle so that they can accommodate that more tight hip angle, so they can actually have their stirrup shorter. Or you might have a rider who prefers to ride with a longer stirrup, and if you have that half seat, it's going to be a bit too floppy for them. So a little bit of testing goes into that. Definitely having the 4 fingers behind is a really good gauge. One of the problems we have at the moment with adult riders on ponies is that we have a short bearing surface for the pony, and we have riders whose bottom might need a 17-inch and a pony's got a 16-inch back. Sometimes what we have to do in those circumstances, for instance, is fit the tree to the pony and the panels to the pony and have what we call an overshot seat. So we can find a way to make sure that the seat is accommodating the rider's bottom and pelvic conformation without compromising having too long a saddle for the pony. Some of that is a little bit of trial and error. What we don't want to see is a rider who needs a 17-inch seat squeeze into the 16-inch saddle and their butt's running up the cantle, which causes them to do a forward pelvic tilt. And we see this in show riders all the time, adults on show ponies trying to fit into little itty bitty saddles and their bums running up the cantle, giving them a forward pelvic tilt. Worse than that though, because their bums filling up all of this saddle, they're putting extreme pressure on the cantle for the pony. And in fact, the example I gave you of atrophy under the cantle and overbuilt loins, we would see that more in show ponies than any other type of horse, because we've got adults riding on saddles that are too small for them, or ponies that are too small for them, and the ponies are getting extreme pressure under the cantle. So that's not a really easy answer to the question, but if you start with that little bit of 4-finger gauge and then add into the elements of, when you sit in a certain type of saddle, does it feel like you're squished up against the knee blocks, Lisa? Does it feel like you're pushed up against the pommel? If you're feeling all of those things, maybe that you need a half size bigger. If you are a really petite little rider and you feel like you need more security because you're floating around, go half size smaller. So there's a little bit of play. You do need to test ride some saddles to try and work out what you need as a particular rider. Okay, I don't see any more questions coming up. I hope that's been really good. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a surprise. I told you that we've relaunched the saddle fitting course. It's called the Horse Saddle Rider Connection course. And it's really cool. I like it, and lots of people who've done it have really enjoyed it. And as I said, we're relaunching it, and we wanted to do a bit of a celebration and also help as many people as possible get into it and start learning a little bit more. So we're going to do a special for you guys. It's normally a $300 course, and we're going to do it for half price for you. And because we're hosting it on Horse Pro Hub, we've got a bit of a special deal. If you're not already a Horse Pro Hub member and in there watching all the videos, we are going to give you a free 12-month subscription because we are so desperate for people to educate themselves, and we want to be able to give you as much information as possible so you can help yourself and your horses and have happy, wonderful horses, comfortable horses, save yourself dollars, save them from injuring themselves as well. So we're going to flick you out an email at the end of this, and you can join us, get on, do the course. You've got lifetime access to the course. You can go back in there as many times as you like, download the PDF checklist. If you get a new horse, you can do it. You can learn how to template and use that to search if you're looking for secondhand saddles. So there's heaps and heaps of content in there and information that you can use to help yourself be more knowledgeable and have a few more skills. And at the same time, go in there and muck around in Horse Pro Hub and learn lots of stuff. Got Dr. Raquel Butler in there who can teach you about belly lifts and carrot lifts and in-hand work to help, rehab horses and posture. We've got amazing farrier series. God, the stuff I've learned from the farrier, Erin Stevens already has just been incredible. So I hope you really enjoy it. I hope you've liked the webinar. It's giving you a little bit of an insight and a little bit of a wake up. I'll send you through a link later in a webinar. I'll send you another email that has some of those downloadable checklists in there. So if you do want to go and have a little look at your own horse's top line profile and start to get a little idea, we can do that. And let me know as well, last year in COVID lockdown, I ran a 5-day challenge that ran you through a whole bunch of this stuff in person. If you want me to run another 5-day Facebook challenge, just, flick us a message, stick me a PM on Facebook, and we'll see if we can get a 5-day saddle fitting challenge back up. We called it a little bit of learning. So thank you so much for all of those lovely messages you're sending through. I hope you've enjoyed this, and check your emails. You'll get an email link shortly to the new course, and it'll log you in and you can start watching and forget the Olympics, and we don't need to watch the show jumpers tonight anyway. And you can go and start enjoying yourself. So thanks everybody so much. It's been wonderful. Thanks, Agatha. It's been wonderful to see you in there. I wish I could have seen your faces. 5-day challenge was great. From Lisa, prefer over the weekend or in daylight savings. Yeah, that's really true. That was one of the problems we had last year. And Paula Ivanovic, thank you for joining us. She's a show jumper, and hats off to you, Paula, because one of our biggest problems is getting our show jumpers to make sure they saddle fit all their horses. So thank you for being on board as well. And I can see some raised hands going on. Is there any more questions? Otherwise, I'm going to say goodnight to you all, and I'm going to go and heat up my cold hot chocolate. Add some vodka to it. Any more questions? Bernadette, thanks. You're welcome. Oh, Lisa, on a slightly downhill horse, would a correctly fitting saddle with a latex panel or a flocked panel be better, or it doesn't matter? Does the latex panel not squish down as much as a flocked panel? Well, actually, latex panels are quite slimline. So, that actually can get you a closer contact, Lisa. So it can actually help not run the saddle forward as much as a more dense panel. The problem you have with latex panel, obviously, is that it doesn't accommodate any shape changes. So if your horse does change shape, we can't actually do anything with changing the flocking. You're kind of stuffed. And we do get a lot of people calling us that have bought latex. Oh, there's a curly one coming up on Care Saddles. I'll answer that in a second. We do get people calling us who've got memory foam or latex panels, and the only thing I can do is change the gullet on some of them. So that's a real problem. And people end up very disappointed when they find that I can't actually do much. There's a couple of brands that you can actually change the latex panels out to another slightly different one. But it is difficult. If someone's going to go and get a latex panel saddle, I say, please get it on a mature horse who has not got a lot more change to happen yet, and not one with asymmetry. Because if you've got a latex panel with a big bulgy shoulder, there is nothing I can do apart from a correction shin pad to help accommodate the bigger shoulder where I can with flocking. So hopefully that answered your question a little bit. Latex is slimmer, so no, it doesn't squish down as much a flock panel. We can get a similar effect with low profile flock panels though, Lisa. Lindsay, where could I purchase shin pads to help support a shoulder that is lacking in muscle? There's actually heaps of places, but if you want to we have Performance Saddlefits has an online store that has the Mattis correction shin system. I think also the Lemure half pads. So it depends whether you want sheepskin or not sheepskin. The Lemure do them. I'm not a big fan of Caribou. I actually don't like the fit of them very much. Grange from Saddle World do them. They're not a bad shape. Please make sure, again, it's got a channel in it. So whenever you're Google searching anything, make sure it's got channel. Don't go for the cheapest shin pad that you've got that you can buy, because often the shims in there are poop. They really are, and they don't give us very good shock absorbency. So, if you've got a horse that trying to do correction work on and rehab work on, do yourself a favor, spend an extra $50 and you will not regret it. You'll get a decent quality correction pad. Okay. I think that's Mario. What are my thoughts on care saddles? Is there anyone from Horseland in here? Okay, care saddles. New ones. I'm going to give you my thoughts on this. So God, you're putting me on the line. If I get sued out of this, you're in trouble. So I don't mind care if the rest of the elements of the saddle fits. So that means that the tree has to be the right shape for the horse. The balance has to be correct. Like all of those things, the pitch of the tree has to be correct for the horse. And then care is just another shock absorbing system. So I don't mind it if the saddle fits correctly. Where I have a really big problem with it is that it's used as a band-aid for a poorly fitting tree, and it does not work. I've actually had a conversation, and we will not mention the person, but it was one of the lecturers for the ASFA course, which is, of course, is the Bates and Horsane course that really massively promote, Wintec and Bates saddles, about the fact that it is being sold as a band-aid and a fit all, and it does not fit all. And he agreed that a lot of the fitters that were fitting the care saddles need a lot more education, because it shouldn't be being fitted like that. So care, if you understand what care is, it is not an airbag. It is not like Flare. Flare is a different product, and it literally is an airbag that we pump up with air. Care is a piece of foam encased in a piece of plastic and sealed up. So it has some air trapped in it. I give the analogy to people that it's like having a sandwich in a Ziploc bag. There is substance to it, there is shape to it, but there's also some air trapped into it because it's in a Ziploc bag. But what it can't do is miraculously change shape. So you can't put pressure here and then it suddenly goes whoop and fills out there. It's not a balloon. You can do a little bit of shape change, so it can go here and a little here, but it doesn't go and fill in the gaps of a poorly fitted tree. So often we will find them fitted to A-frame thoroughbreds, and you might have a care panel that's like the tree itself is a flat tree, and you've got an A-frame horse, and you've got this big triangle shape that the panel needs to fill. The care panel is not going to accommodate that. The other problem I have is the plastic shim system. I actually really don't like it, and we've seen some really poor jobs of it. In the older care saddles, you do have to be super careful. They do get leaks. And I did used to sell Wintec and Bates saddles when I owned Saddle World Canberra, so I have sent many of them back to have the care panels replaced. So we do know that it's a problem. And the problem with the care panels is that you don't notice that it's flat, because usually there's a tiny, tiny little leak in it, and it has atmospheric pressure in it. So it when you pull it out of the tack room and shove it on your horse, it looks like it's all right. But after an hour of riding, it's slowly squished down to just being the foam supporting it. So, you know, I always say to people, it's not like I'm riding along and suddenly go, oh, got a flat. It doesn't feel like that. What's happened is it's slowly sunk, and now you've got asymmetric pressure on the horse. Then you throw it back in the tack room again, and asymmetric and atmospheric pressure sucks air back into it, and it's back to where it is. So you're not noticing it, but it is bottoming out on your horse. And so it does cause problems over time. We regularly pull care panels out, especially on old saddles, and flock them so that we can make some more adjustability to them. So that's my thoughts on care. Thin line, Emma Green, what are my thoughts on thin line pads? I don't mind thin line pads. I don't love the plain ones. So I don't like just that funny little square that they've got, because it actually doesn't have a really good top line cut. I love the concept about it, and there's been lots of pressure testing into it. So it actually is a really good shock absorbing product. Sometimes we have problems with the seams that connect the actual thin line material to the half pads are quite a thick seam. So on some horses with atrophy, especially if they've got a wider spine, that seam at the top edge can cause a problem. The other problem that I have seen on some horses using the thin line, they'll often use a thin line pad with a jumping saddle, but the thin line pad at the front doesn't have a jumping cut to it. So often they're using like kind of a dressage shape, and then you've got the flap coming over the top of that. But where that seam is, when the shoulder rotates, it's actually a point of pressure underneath the jumping saddle. So you just have to be really careful of it. But I don't mind thin line correction pads. I don't love the shims that are in them. I like the material itself, but some of those shims are damn chunky and they don't have a proper bevel on them. So if you're using those really thick thin line correction shims, it just kind of goes, you know, and tapers off. So there's going to be an area where there's not even pressure distribution. So I don't love those. So often I'll use a thin line pad if someone's got one and it's got the thin line material on it, but I'll stick a felt shim in it. So yeah. Okay, what have we got else? What do I think about treeless saddles? Oh, Rosemary, I don't love treeless saddles. There's been lots of studies. There's some treeless saddles, the really, 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 really expensive ones that come with some pretty amazing pads that go underneath them, which help with the pressure distribution. But they're an exception to the rule. And there's been so many pressure studies done now that the tree is designed to distribute your weight over the greatest surface areas possible in a saddle. A treeless saddle buckles. Okay, so when it doesn't have a tree and you've got stirrup bars and a girth point down at the base of the wither, and then you've got a rider sitting there as well, especially if they rise up in those stirrups, you are getting a high pressure impact area over the base of the wither. It is not in that moment of rise, it is not distributing your weight over the greatest surface areas possible. So that's what I think about treeless saddles. If you must go a treeless saddle, you need to invest in the best quality treeless saddle with the best quality pad underneath it you can do. Elise, care and heart. Do you know what? I actually can't answer you on the heart. I haven't fitted with heart. I don't understand the heart system very well. So I wish I could say that. I'd have to do a little bit of research on that and get back to you. Thoughts on Acavale pads? Yeah, we use them. You know, they can be really good for horses who are asymmetric or roly-poly and throw, you know, saddles all over the joint because they're grippy, and you know, they're kind of the openness of the cells, the cell itself moves a little bit without it rolling sideways. So I don't mind them. Again, has to fit properly. You know, if you've got horses with problems or it's got asymmetry, the Acavale pad's not going to help the asymmetry, but we like them. And I like the holes, so they are more breathable as well. Natalie, have I had much experience with flare? Absolutely. Personal experience. I had flare in one of my own saddles on one of my warm bloods, as well as I've got a flare pump and know how to fit them. Flare can be good, but it also has its downside. So if you imagine and think about the fact that flare is an airbag, imagine having your horse's back, sticking a fit ball on it, and then sticking a rider on top. There's a lot of relative movement going on between all of those elements. So one of the things that we discovered is flare can be really exceptional on riders who are really good riders with really good core control, so they can control their pelvis really well. Oh dear, I've got a dog that needs to go out. She's like, "You finished? You've been on this for an hour and 40 minutes now. Let me out. I need a wee." Hang on to, yeah, I'm sorry, this is really unprofessional, but I have to let this dog out. She's going to pee on my carpet. Come on, darling, out you come. Right, back. Okay, that was quick. Sorry, guys. I don't need it. She's a chronic peer on the carpet. If we don't let her out, she needs to pee. Flare. So football, horse, rider. If you've got really good core control and good core muscle and good flexibility through your spine and your pelvis, you can absorb the movement through your pelvis that fit ball or the flare panel is creating. What we discovered though is when we had novice riders go on flare and they didn't have good control of their core and pelvis and spine, they would lock on with their extremities because they're all over the place. They just didn't have the balance and control and the proprioception to cope with that amount of movement through the saddle. And so then they would end up using too much of their arms and their legs to try and control movement. Oh my gosh, guys, you got so many questions. I think we're going to have to do another webinar because the questions are piling on. We've been on for an hour and 45 on our hour webinar. I'm so sorry I can't answer all your questions. I'll take a screenshot of it. I think this is a recording, so it'll allow me to go and screenshot it. And maybe what we need to do is another webinar. Are you all up for another webinar? Wave your hands at me if you want to do another webinar. Yay, lots of people waving it. Yeah, there's so much, isn't there? There's so much to learn. It's one of the reasons why, honest to God, I wish I could convince everyone to pop in and do the course, because you're going to learn so much in there and you really, really are going to be able to problem solve a lot of stuff for yourself. So, you know, please consider doing that. And as I said, I've made it half price for you. It's the same price as getting me out for a Saddlefit. It's $150 or $149. So that's how much it costs to get me to come and do a Saddlefit for you. And you only get me for an hour and a half. You get this for a lifetime. So I think we're going to have to chop this off now, but let's try and do another webinar. And, you know, maybe we need to start up a Facebook group again. You know, that we used to have a Facebook group where you can come and ask lots of questions and things like that. If we're going to be in lockdown, we might as well do something like that. But I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'm sorry it's gone on for so long. We've had a bit of a drop off on participants, but there's a few hardcorers in there. You're all sticking in with it, so I hope you've loved it. And I'm going to say good night for now, and I hope you have a good evening. Have a great weekend, and go and hug your horses, and go and do a little bit of looking at your horses tomorrow, and take a really good look and put some of these ideas into it. So good night everybody.